The afternoon sun shimmered against the glossy red Ferrari, parked like a ruby on the marble driveway of the Grantwood estate. Laughter echoed through the air, high-pitched, careless, and sharp. The kind of laughter that comes from people who've never had to worry about anything in their lives. At the center of it all stood Richard Halden, a tall man in his early 30s with slick blonde hair and a smirk that could slice through glass. His blue tuxedo caught the light with every movement, and the glint of his diamond cufflinks spoke louder than words. Money. Arrogance, power. Across from him stood Samuel Brooks, an older man with dark, weathered skin and tired eyes that carried years of quiet struggle. His brown jacket hung loosely over his shoulders, and his hands, rough and strong, clutched an old rag he'd used moments ago to wipe the car's mirror. "Tell you what." "Oh, man," Richard said, his voice loud enough for everyone around to hear. "If you can make that Ferrari start, it's yours." The laughter around them grew louder. The guests, most of them dressed in expensive suits and glittering gowns, looked at Samuel as if the offer itself was a cruel joke. Samuel looked at the car, then back at Richard. "Sir, I just came to clean the driveway. I wasn't told to touch the car." "Oh, come on," Richard grinned, stepping closer, his polished shoes clicking against the stone. "You fix things for a living, don't you?" "What's the harm in trying?" "Unless you're scared," the crowd murmured. That same poisonous amusement rippled through them like wind over fire. Someone whispered, "He probably doesn't even know what a Ferrari key looks like." Samuel said nothing. His eyes, deep and calm, flicked toward the car once more. The Ferrari looked perfect from the outside, but he could already tell something wasn't right. A faint smell of burnt wiring, a loose hum from beneath the hood. He could sense it, the way a musician hears when an instrument is slightly out of tune. Richard tossed the keys onto the marble with a careless flick of his wrist. "Go on then, make it run. You get the car if you can." The keys clinked against the ground near Samuel's feet. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the laughter seemed to hold its breath. Samuel slowly bent down, picked up the keys, and turned toward the Ferrari. The bright red reflection danced in his eyes. He walked to the car, his movements deliberate, quiet. He placed his hand on the hood, and it was still warm. He circled around to the back, pressed the trunk release, and looked inside. A few guests snickered. "He's checking the trunk," one of them said mockingly, but Samuel wasn't checking. He was listening. To the silence, to the faint echo of electricity. He knew engines like others knew prayers. After a moment, he walked to the driver's side, opened the door, and sat down. The leather seat creaked softly beneath him. Richard folded his arms, smirking. "Careful, old man." "Don't scratch the paint. It costs more than your house." Samuel inserted the key. The engine didn't even cough. Dead silence. The laughter returned, louder this time. Richard leaned back, enjoying the show. "Guess it's not your day, huh? That's what happens when you dream too high." But Samuel didn't react. His fingers brushed lightly over the steering wheel, then reached beneath the dash, touching a small panel. His thumb pressed against a hidden latch and something clicked. His voice was calm, quiet. "You had this car serviced recently?" Richard frowned. "Yeah, last week. Why?" Samuel nodded slightly. "Whoever worked on it left the grounding wire loose. It shorted your ignition." The crowd went silent. Samuel stepped out of the car, moved around to the front, and popped the hood. His hands moved with steady precision, undoing a single screw, reconnecting a wire, tightening it with nothing more than the cloth he carried. It took less than 30 seconds. He closed the hood gently, walked back to the driver's seat, and turned the key once more. The engine roared to life, deep, powerful, flawless. The sound cut through the silence like thunder. Gasps filled the air. Someone dropped their glass. Even Richard's confident smirk vanished, replaced by shock. Samuel sat quietly, the soft hum of the engine filling the driveway. Then he turned it off, stepped out, and placed the keys on the hood. "You said I'd get the car if I made it run," he said softly, his voice steady but not bitter. Richard's jaw clenched. For the first time, he had nothing to say. His friends looked at him, waiting for him to laugh it off, to twist it somehow. But even they stayed silent. Samuel smiled faintly. Don't worry. I don't need your car. He wiped his hands on the rag, turned, and began to walk away. Richard took a step forward. Wait! Samuel stopped, half turning his head. How did you know what was wrong with it? Richard asked. The old man's eyes softened. Because I built engines like that? Before you were born. He turned again and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a silence heavy with embarrassment and respect that Richard couldn't quite name. The Ferrari's reflection still burned in his eyes, but this time it wasn't pride he saw there. It was shame. The guests drifted away, murmuring between themselves as if afraid to break the spell that moment had left behind. The laughter that once filled the driveway now hung like smoke after a fire, faint, uncomfortable, lingering. Richard stood still, staring at the red Ferrari as the echo of the engine's roar replayed in his mind. He should have felt angry, embarrassed, maybe both. But what he felt instead was something unfamiliar, something like guilt. Inside the mansion, the music from the evening party resumed. Glasses clinked, people laughed again, and the world tried to move on. But Richard couldn't. He followed the old man with his eyes until Samuel disappeared through the front gates, that faded brown jacket slowly blending into the dusk. Later that night, the house grew quiet. Richard sat alone in his study, the soft glow of the fireplace painting orange shadows across the walls. His phone buzzed with messages, friends joking about the Ferrari incident, memes already spreading in their social circles. He turned the screen face down. He poured himself a drink, but it didn't taste the same anymore. His reflection in the glass, perfect tuxedo, perfect life, suddenly looked shallow. He leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, who was that man? Across town, Samuel walked along the dimly lit street toward a small, worn-down house at the corner. The porch light flickered weakly as he pushed the gate open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil, metal, and time. A half-disassembled engine rested on the table, surrounded by old wrenches and faded blueprints. A picture frame sat beside it, an image of a younger Samuel wearing a mechanic's uniform, his arm wrapped proudly around a teenage boy. The boy's smile was bright, full of life. Samuel touched the photo gently, his thumb brushing over the boy's face. Almost finished, Marcus, he murmured. One day you'll have your own shop just like we planned. The silence answered him back. Outside, a car passed, its headlights flashing through the window, lighting up a small wooden plaque on the wall, Brooks & Son Auto Works, since 1988. But there was no sun anymore. Not since that night 10 years ago when Marcus had been driving home from a late shift. The brakes failed on the old truck. Faulty parts Samuel hadn't been able to replace in time. By the time he reached the hospital, it was too late. From that day, Samuel had stopped building engines. He fixed cars for others, but never for himself. The Ferrari had been the first time in years he'd touched something that powerful, and it had reminded him what he'd lost. The next morning, just as he was locking up his gate, a sleek black car pulled up. The window rolled down, and there sat Richard, no tuxedo this time, just a simple white shirt and jeans, his hair slightly undone. Mr. Brooks? Samuel turned slowly, his brows furrowed. You followed me? Richard stepped out of the car, looking strangely out of place against the cracked pavement. I needed to thank you properly. Yesterday, you made me look like a fool, but I deserved that. Samuel tilted his head. Did you come here to say that or to ease your conscience? Richard hesitated. The truth stung, but he nodded. Maybe both. He glanced at the house, the worn tools, the sign above the door. You were a mechanic? I still am, Samuel said quietly. Some things don't stop because the world forgets you. Richard walked inside when Samuel gestured. The small workshop was cluttered but alive with character, like the soul of a man who had lived many lives. On the wall hung sketches of engine designs, some hand-drawn, some decades old. You built these? Richard asked, touching one of the drawings. Samuel nodded. Used to work for Grant Motors. Helped design the first hybrid prototype they ever made. But when they downsized, I wasn't needed anymore. You worked for Grant? Richard's eyes widened. My father owns that company. I know, Samuel said simply, wiping his hands with the same old rag. That's why I didn't expect you to remember me. Your father visited my shop once. I fixed one of his first Ferraris. He was a proud man, but not cruel. Richard swallowed hard. He died 5 years ago. Samuel nodded slowly. He'd be disappointed seeing how you treat people now. The words weren't said in anger. They were soft, heavy with truth. Richard looked away, unable to meet the older man's gaze. After a moment, Samuel sighed. You're not a bad man, Richard. Just untested. Life's been too easy for you. That's not your fault, but it's your burden to change. Richard looked around again, at the photo of Samuel and his son. Is that your boy? Samuel's hands stilled for a moment. He was. Richard didn't ask further. He didn't have to. The air between them spoke enough. Finally, he said, You. The next morning came with the slow warmth of sunlight crawling through the cracks of the old workshop windows. Dust floated in golden ribbons as Samuel tightened the last bolt on a half-built engine. Outside, the world was waking up. Dogs barking, a bus groaning past. But inside that small garage, time seemed to move slower. The sound of tires crunching over gravel broke the calm. A silver sedan stopped outside. Richard stepped out, not with his usual swagger, but carrying a small toolbox. He wore work gloves and a plain shirt already stained with grease. Samuel glanced up, eyebrow raised. Didn't expect you'd actually show up. Richard smiled faintly. You told me to come back. Figured I'd better listen. The old man motioned toward the workbench. You ever built an engine before? Only broke a few, Richard said dryly. Samuel smirked, handing him a wrench. Then today you learn what it means to fix one. They worked in near silence at first. The only sounds were the clicks of metal, the low hum of an old radio, and the rhythmic scrape of tools. Richard's movements were clumsy, uncertain. He dropped a bolt, fumbled a socket, cursed under his breath. Slow down, Samuel said, his tone calm but firm. Engines are like people. You rush them, they break. Richard exhaled, nodded, and tried again. This time his hands steadied. Hours passed. Sweat rolled down his temples. The white shirt turned gray with dust and oil, and for the first time in his life, Richard felt something he'd never known before, a quiet satisfaction in creating instead of consuming. When the engine finally came together, Samuel connected the final wire. Moment of truth, he said softly. Richard turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life, louder and cleaner than he expected. He grinned like a child. It works! Samuel just nodded. Of course it does. Everything works when you respect it enough to understand it. Richard leaned against the hood, still catching his breath. I can't believe how much I've missed. All this time I thought success was owning things. But this, he gestured to the humming engine. This feels real. Samuel wiped his hands on the rag, watching him carefully. You've got money but no roots. That's a dangerous thing, son. Richard hesitated. I don't have family left. Not really. Samuel looked at him quietly. Then build one. Not by blood, but by choice. That night, Richard didn't return to the mansion. He stayed late, helping Samuel organize old parts, listening to stories about the people he once worked with and the engines he built that ended up in race cars and museum pieces. As the hours passed, the two men found an unspoken rhythm, teacher and student, opposites bound by shared purpose, but not everyone saw it that way. The next afternoon, as they were working, a black SUV pulled up. Out stepped Mason Hale, Richard's business partner, a man with slick hair, an expensive watch, and a voice that oozed entitlement. Richard, what the hell are you doing here? Mason's gaze swept over the small workshop with disgust. We've got a gala tonight. Investors are asking for you. Richard didn't look up. I'm busy. Busy? Mason scoffed. With him? He nodded toward Samuel. You're joking, right? This old garage smells like rust and poverty. Samuel didn't flinch, but the words hit hard. Richard saw it in his eyes. He straightened up, his voice steady. Watch your mouth, Mason. Excuse me? You heard me. You don't talk to him like that. Mason laughed. Richard, you've lost it. We built an empire on your name, and now you're wasting time fixing engines with some mechanic? Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. You know what the difference is between him and us? He builds things. We just buy them. Mason's grin faltered. You're seriously choosing this? Over everything we've worked for? I'm choosing what's right, Richard said simply. Samuel stayed silent, watching with calm, steady eyes. Mason shook his head, muttering, You'll regret this. Then he turned and stormed back to his SUV, slamming the door so hard the old garage windows rattled. The silence afterward was heavy. Richard let out a breath, rubbing his hands over his face. Guess that's the end of a partnership. Samuel smiled faintly. Sometimes things have to break before you can rebuild them right. Days turned into weeks. The two men began restoring old cars together, piece by piece. People from the neighborhood started stopping by, first out of curiosity, then with their own cars, their own stories. Word spread quickly. The millionaire who gave up luxury to work in a mechanic's shop. But for Richard, it wasn't about reputation anymore. It was redemption. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Samuel brought out a small box from a cabinet. Inside was an old metal key attached to a leather tag. He handed it to Richard. What's this? Samuel smiled softly. The first car my son and I built together. It's been sitting in the back all these years. Needs work. But I think it's time someone finished it. Richard held the key like it was something sacred. I don't know what to say. Say you'll take care of it, Samuel replied. That's enough. They walked to the back of the workshop. Covered under a dusty tarp sat a faded blue coupe. Its paint cracked, tires flat, but the shape still beautiful. Richard ran his hand along the hood. It's perfect, Samuel nodded. We'll fix it together. The older man turned off the lights one by one. The last glow fading over the two of them standing beside that forgotten car, an unlikely pair bound not by wealth or need, but by respect. Outside, the world carried on. But inside that small garage, something greater had begun, a new engine of redemption, humming quietly between two souls who had finally learned what it truly meant to build. The weeks rolled into months. What began as a quiet act of humility became a transformation the world couldn't ignore. The once idle Grantwood estate now sat mostly empty, while across town a small sign gleamed under the sun. Halden and Brooks Restoration. We build second chances. The name caught people's attention. Customers came not for luxury, but for honesty. Mechanics, apprentices, even kids from the neighborhood came to learn. The old workshop had become something more, a place where engines weren't the only things being rebuilt. But the higher they rose, the louder the whispers became. One morning, Richard arrived to find Samuel sitting outside reading the newspaper. The headline hit like a gut punch. Disgraced millionaire abandons business empire to work for ex-employee. Richard sighed. Guess they found us. Samuel folded the paper slowly. You knew it was coming. I did. I just didn't think they'd drag you into it, Samuel chuckled, the sound deep and calm. Son, I've been through worse than headlines. Still, something in Richard's face told him the words hurt. There were pictures, Richard in greasy clothes, Samuel beside him, the caption mocking them both. That evening, after everyone left, Richard stayed behind. The garage was quiet except for the tick of a cooling engine. He sat alone, staring at the dim reflection of the red Ferrari parked in the corner, the same one from that humiliating day. He had bought it back from the dealership, not as a trophy but as a reminder, he whispered to himself. You were right, old man. Everything works when you respect it enough to understand it, a soft voice answered from the doorway. That's not about cars, Richard. That's about people. Samuel stepped inside, holding 2 mugs of coffee. I saw what they wrote. Let them talk. You're building something that'll outlast noise. Richard smiled faintly. You always know what to say. Samuel leaned against the counter. Years of silence teach you the right words. A pause settled between them. Quiet, thoughtful. Then Samuel's hand trembled slightly as he set the mug down. Richard noticed. You okay? The old man hesitated. Just a little tired. But the next morning Samuel didn't show up. Richard waited an hour, then drove to his house. The door was unlocked, the coffee on the table still warm, the chair pushed slightly back, and on the workbench lay an open envelope addressed to Richard Halden. His hands shook as he unfolded it. "Son, if you're reading this, it means my time's finally caught up with me. Don't look for sadness where there's gratitude. I've seen more in these last months than I did in the last decade. Hope, purpose, and a reason to believe people can change. There's something I never told you. Your father, Thomas Halden, wasn't just my employer. He was my student once, back when he was a broke engineer learning to design his first engines. I taught him how to build, and in return, he taught me to dream. He promised he'd never forget where he came from. I think he kept that promise, until time and money made him forget for a while. You reminded me of him, arrogant, stubborn, but with a good heart under all that noise. I wanted to see if there was still kindness left in the name Halden. Now I know there is. Don't chase forgiveness, build it. Don't run from mistakes that rebuild them. And when that blue coupe is finished, take it for a drive. Let it remind you that second chances aren't given. They're earned. With respect, Samuel Brooks." Richard lowered the letter, eyes wet but steady. The old man's words felt heavier than any lecture, softer than any apology. He drove back to the garage that night, unlocked the door, and pulled the tarp off the blue coupe. The sight hit him like a heartbeat. Every bolt, every scar of rust, every faded paint streak, all of it told a story. He worked through the night. His hands bled, his shoulders ached, but he kept going. The sun rose, the engine hummed, and finally, when he turned the key, it came alive. Smooth, deep, pure. For a moment, he just sat there, letting the sound fill the silence that Samuel used to occupy. He whispered, "You did it again, old man. You made some tea." The years moved on quietly, like a steady breeze over the open road. Grantwood Estate was eventually sold, its marble floors and gold fixtures replaced by silence. But in the heart of the city, that small garage with the faded blue sign never stopped glowing. Halden and Brooks Restoration had become more than a business. It was a legacy, a promise carved into steel, oil, and time. Every young man who walked through its doors knew the story. They whispered it like a legend. A rich man once tried to humiliate a poor mechanic by challenging him to make a Ferrari run. The poor man didn't just fix the car, he fixed the man. Now every car restored there carried a small mark under its hood, SB engraved carefully into the metal. Samuel Brooks. No customer ever asked what it meant, but every time Richard saw it, he smiled. It was his quiet way of saying, "Thank you, old man." One rainy afternoon, a reporter arrived, young, eager, camera in hand. She had heard the rumors, the redemption story. "Mr. Halden," she asked, "you once owned the largest automotive company in the state. Now you run a small garage. Do you ever regret giving it all up?" Richard paused, wiping his hands on a cloth Samuel once used. He looked at the blue coupe parked outside, the one that had once been scrap. He said softly, "That depends on what you think I gave up. I used to chase perfection, shiny cars, perfect paint, flawless designs. But then I met a man who showed me that real perfection isn't in how something looks. It's in how it runs." The reporter smiled, lowering her camera. "That's beautiful. What was his name?" Richard glanced at the photograph pinned above the workbench. Samuel in his old mechanic's jacket, a quiet smile on his face. He whispered, "His name was Samuel Brooks. The man who made my life run again." Outside, the rain stopped. A single ray of light broke through the clouds, landing directly on the hood of the Ferrari, untouched all these years. Richard walked over, opened the door, and placed Samuel's old rag on the driver's seat. "You earned this one, my friend." As the door closed with a soft click, the camera would slowly pull back, the garage glowing in warm amber light, the hum of engines fading beneath the sound of calm wind, and the voiceover would echo the morale quietly, like a truth the heart already knew. A man's worth isn't measured by what he drives, but by what drives him.